My sister humiliated me by seating me in the low-class guest section, believing I did not deserve to be at her wedding. But everything changed the moment her manager Fiancé saw me. His face turned pale, his glass slipped from his hand, and one shocking secret brought the entire wedding to a standstill. My name is Kiara, 32 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful private equity CEO, I escaped their toxicity, but maintained occasional contact. Last weekend, they invited me to the wedding of the century. Between the crystal chandeliers and the designer gowns, my sister leaned forward smirking. She threw a dirty waiter apron at my face. "You know, Kiara, you are lucky we even let you in the building. Pity goes a long way." I simply sipped my water and smiled. That night, I initiated a hostile takeover of her new husband's company and finalized the eviction notice for our parents' estate. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who severely underestimated your worth. Growing up in Atlanta meant privilege to outsiders, but inside our sprawling estate, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our house was a fortress of societal expectations I could never quite meet. From high school through college, I was the disappointment because I cared more about building my business than pledging my mother Vivian's legacy sorority. When I dropped out to focus on my startup, they threw me out into the street. They told their country club friends I was a lost cause, selling homemade soap from the trunk of a beat-up sedan. They never knew that Soap Company evolved into Obsidian Vanguard, the most ruthless private equity firm on the East Coast. The grand ballroom of the hotel buzzed with the chatter of Atlanta's most elite families. I arrived wearing a bespoke black suit. It had no designer logos, but the tailoring alone cost $20,000. I walked past the towering floral arrangements and ice sculptures, making my way toward the front of the room, where the VIP family tables were cordoned off by velvet ropes. Two massive security guards stepped directly into my path, crossing their arms. Their eyes scanned my unbranded suit with obvious disdain. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice polite but firm. "I am the sister of the bride. My name is Kiara Washington." The taller guard pulled a laminated guest list from his jacket pocket. He ran his finger down the VIP section, shook his head, and flipped to the very last page. He pointed toward the back of the ballroom. "You are not on the VIP list, ma'am. You are seated at table 89. I turned my head to look at where he was pointing. Table 89 was not just at the back of the room. It was practically inside the service corridor. The small wobbly table sat directly next to the swinging kitchen doors. A large gray plastic bin, full of scraped plates and half-eaten food, rested just inches from the chairs. Waiters and busboys congregated there, wiping sweat from their foreheads and tossing soiled napkins into laundry bags. Before I could even process the blatant disrespect, the sharp clicking of designer heels echoed over the smooth marble floor. My sister Jasmine marched toward me. Her custom Vera Wang gown trailed behind her like a royal cape, and her hair was pinned up in an immaculate updo adorned with pearls. She looked radiant, but her eyes held that familiar vicious glint I had known since childhood. Jasmine stopped right in front of me, her gaze sweeping over my outfit with open disgust. She snatched a stained white apron from a passing waiter and threw it violently onto the rusty surface of table 89. "Put this on, or get out," Kiara Jasmine hissed, leaning in close so the security guards could hear every word. DeAndre's family represents 3 generations of Atlanta elite. His father is a judge and his mother practically runs the city's high society. I absolutely cannot have his mother knowing my biological sister is a college dropout who lives in poverty. "Sit with the kitchen staff where you belong, or put the apron on and make yourself useful picking up trash." The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air. This was her grand plan. She invited me solely to put me in my place, to remind me of the hierarchy she believed existed between us. She wanted to humiliate me in front of the very people she worshipped. I looked at the stained apron resting on the table. Then I looked at the bustling waiters who were now staring at us with wide eyes. I did not cry. I did not scream. The terrified, desperate 19-year-old girl they had kicked out of their house no longer existed. In her place stood a woman who routinely destroyed multi-million-dollar corporations before breakfast. I calmly reached out and picked up the apron. I held it by the strings, examining the grease stains. Then I casually dropped it directly into the busboy's plastic bin of dirty dishwater. "I will not be wearing that," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I pulled out one of the wobbly chairs and sat down at table 89. I carefully smoothed the creases of my $20,000 trousers and crossed my legs. Jasmine's jaw dropped. She clearly expected me to run out of the building in tears exactly like I used to do when we were teenagers. "Are you deaf?" Jasmine demanded, her voice rising in pitch. "I said you are ruining my wedding optics. You do not belong here." I looked up at her and smiled. It was a cold, calculating smile. "I belong exactly where I choose to sit, Jasmine. And trust me, the only people dressing in matching uniforms tonight will be your new in-laws when they get fitted for their federal prison jumpsuits." Jasmine froze. The absolute certainty in my voice caught her completely off guard. She blinked rapidly, her mind struggling to comprehend how the sister she viewed as a peasant could speak with such terrifying authority. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her hands balling into fists at her sides. "What lies are you making up now?" Before I could explain exactly how much danger her precious groom was in, a new voice pierced the air. "What is going on here? Why is she still in the building?" I did not need to turn around to recognize the sharp, commanding tone of my mother, Vivian. She marched through the crowd, her emerald green evening gown shimmering under the ballroom lights. But she was not alone. Walking right beside her, practically dripping in diamonds and old money arrogance, was Beatrice DeAndre's terrifying mother. Beatrice was the ultimate snobbish matriarch of Atlanta's old money circle, a woman who judged people entirely by their bank accounts and family surnames. Vivian's eyes darted nervously between Beatrice and me. She rushed forward and positioned her body to physically block Beatrice's view of me, treating me like a hazardous spill that needed to be contained. "Security," Vivian barked, gesturing wildly at the two guards. "I want this woman removed from the premises immediately. She is trespassing." "Mother, I have a printed invitation," I replied smoothly, tapping the thick envelope resting on the table. "You sent it to my old post office box. I assume you only sent it so you could pull this exact stunt tonight." "You are a dark stain," Vivian hissed. "You have always been a stain. Just like the day you refused to pledge my legacy sorority to play with your stupid little startup business. Look at Jasmine. She secured a man who runs the Horizon Investment Fund. She is my pride and joy, and you are a complete embarrassment. Get out before Beatrice realizes who you are." Beatrice sidestepped Vivian, locking her gaze onto me. She looked down her nose. "Well," Beatrice said loudly, "I had no idea your family had relatives who worked in manual labor. It must be exhausting carrying the weight of such low-class connections." Vivian turned bright red, practically shrinking. "Oh, Beatrice, please excuse her. We hardly claim her anymore." I sat back down, completely unbothered by their theatrical performance. A waiter hurried past. I caught his attention, pulling a titanium black Centurion card from my pocket. "Excuse me," I said, handing him the card. "Bring me your finest champagne. Keep a $500 tip and run this open tab." The waiter stared at the legendary card, his eyes wide. "Yes, ma'am," he stammered, leaving. Beatrice watched the interaction, her eyes narrowing as she processed the exclusive card. She recovered her arrogant posture, scoffing loudly at the scene before her. DeAndre, my sister's fiancé, adjusted the cuffs of his tailored tuxedo, his expression morphing into one of pure disgust. The diamond-encrusted watch on his wrist caught the light as he sneered at me. "I heard stories about you," Kiara DeAndre said, his voice loud enough to carry over the gentle hum of the string quartet playing in the background. "Jasmine warned me you were a lost cause, a college dropout playing business with homemade soap. I should have known better than to expect basic decency from someone who clearly has not seen the inside of a boardroom in their life. You are an embarrassment to the name she is about to take." I looked at him, my expression unreadable. I reached for the glass of ice water that the waiter had hastily placed in front of me, taking a slow, deliberate sip. The cold water did little to quell the fire burning inside me, but years of navigating the cutthroat world of corporate takeovers had taught me the power of silence. The longer I stayed quiet, the more frantic they became. "Are you deaf?" Vivian, my mother, hissed. Her voice, usually carefully modulated to project an aura of effortless wealth, was now shrill with panic. She practically lunged at me, her manicured fingers digging painfully into my arm. I said, "Get out. You are a stain on this family. Just like the day you refused to pledge my legacy sorority to play with your stupid little startup. I should have known you would show up here looking like a stray dog to ruin your sister's special day." I carefully peeled her fingers off my arm, my gaze fixed on her face. A waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes hesitated, unsure whether to approach the escalating scene. I raised a hand, signaling him over. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the noise with chilling clarity. "You cannot sit here without ordering, ma'am," the waiter stammered, clearly intimidated by Vivian's glare. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. I did not pull out a crumpled $10 bill or a maxed-out credit card. I extracted a sleek, heavy titanium black Centurion card. The kind of card that did not just open doors, it bought the entire building. "I will take a bottle of Louis Roederer Cristal," I told him, handing over the card. "The vintage one. Keep a $5,000 tip." The waiter's eyes widened, and he practically stumbled backward in his haste to fulfill the order. Vivian stared at the card, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Jasmine, who had been reveling in my humiliation, now looked confused, her perfectly painted lips forming a tight, anxious line. Before either of them could speak, a new presence announced itself. Beatrice, DeAndre's mother, stepped forward. She was a formidable woman draped in diamonds and an aura of generational wealth that she wielded like a weapon. She looked me up and down, a mocking laugh escaping her lips. "Vivian, is this the delinquent daughter who ruined your credit score?" Beatrice asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "The one who stole from your husband's campaign fund." I had heard the rumors, but seeing her in person, well, it certainly explains a lot. The accusation hit me like a physical blow, not because it was true, but because of the sheer audacity of the lie. They had blamed their own financial mismanagement on me. They had used me as the scapegoat for Reginald's corrupt campaign practices when they kicked me out a decade ago. I had built my empire while they spun a web of lies to protect their fragile social standing. I took another sip of my water, my eyes locking onto Beatrice. "My credit score is flawless, Beatrice," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "Which is more than I can say for your summer mansion in Martha's Vineyard that just hit the foreclosure auction block this morning." Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. Her face drained of color, and the smug superiority vanished, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. How do you know about that?" Beatrice stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Before I could answer, the ballroom lights dimmed. The gentle string quartet was replaced by the sudden booming voice of the MC. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, "please direct your attention to the main stage." The sudden shift in focus offered a temporary reprieve, but the tension at table 89 was palpable. Beatrice looked like she was going to faint. Vivian was staring at me as if she had seen a ghost, and Jasmine looked furious, her carefully constructed narrative unraveling before her eyes. DeAndre, oblivious to the bomb I had just dropped, puffed out his chest and strode toward the stage, eager for his moment in the spotlight. I sat back in my wobbly chair, the titanium card resting on the table in front of me. The first domino had fallen. The meticulously crafted facade of Atlanta's elite was beginning to crack, and I was holding the sledgehammer. The night was far from over. The spotlight hit the stage, illuminating DeAndre. He grabbed the microphone, his smile wide, and practiced the epitome of a successful executive. He thanked everyone for coming, his words slick with the practiced charm of a man accustomed to getting his way. He spoke of love, of family, of the legacy he and Jasmine were building. It was all a performance, a carefully choreographed display of wealth and success. "And now," DeAndre continued, his voice booming over the speakers, "I have a very special announcement. Many of you know that my firm has been working on a massive deal. Well, I am thrilled to share that as of this morning, we are officially being acquired for $100 million by the private equity giant Obsidian Vanguard." The ballroom erupted in applause. Vivian beamed, clapping her hands together, the picture of a proud mother-in-law. Beatrice, though still pale from our earlier exchange, managed a strained smile. Jasmine looked triumphant, her eyes darting toward me, clearly expecting to see me crushed by the sheer magnitude of DeAndre's success. DeAndre held up a hand, silencing the crowd. "But that is not all," he said, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. "Tonight we have an incredibly special guest. The elusive billionaire CEO of Obsidian Vanguard, Mr. K. Washington, has graced us with his presence." He gestured expansively toward the VIP section. "Please, Mr. Washington, if you would be so kind as to stand and be recognized." The spotlight operator, a young man I had discreetly slipped $1,000 earlier in the evening, knew exactly what to do. The beam of light swept past the VIP tables, past the politicians, the doctors, the legacy fraternity alumni. It bypassed the entire section of Atlanta's elite searching hunting. DeAndre frowned, shielding his eyes from the glare. The light continued its journey, moving toward the back of the room, past the main tables, past the dance floor. It finally stopped, resting dead center on table 89. The spotlight illuminated me perfectly. I was sitting comfortably, the titanium card still resting on the table, my expression a mask of calm certainty. I raised my newly arrived glass of Louis Roederer crystal, a silent toast to the bewildered groom. DeAndre stared into the blinding light, his eyes squinting as he tried to make out the figure sitting at the table he had designated for the hired help. "K. Washington." DeAndre called out, his voice tinged with confusion. I did not move. I simply sat there, bathed in the spotlight, allowing the silence to stretch. The applause had died down, replaced by a confused murmuring that rippled through the crowd. DeAndre stepped closer to the edge of the stage, his eyes adjusting to the glare. When he finally recognized me, the change in his demeanor was instantaneous. The arrogant swagger evaporated. His jaw dropped and the blood drained from his face so quickly I thought he might pass out. The crystal microphone slipped from his fingers, hitting the stage floor with a deafening high-pitched screech that echoed through the silent ballroom. He stood frozen, staring at me, the reality of the situation crashing down upon him. He had seated his new boss, the person who held the fate of his entire company in her hands, at a table next to the kitchen doors. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Even the waiters had stopped moving. Everyone was watching DeAndre, watching his slow, agonizing realization. I took a slow sip of my champagne, savoring the taste. The second domino had fallen, and the crash was spectacular. DeAndre's microphone hit the stage floor with a sickening, high-pitched squeal that ripped through the ballroom. The $500 crystal-encrusted piece of equipment cracked, rolling toward the edge of the stage. The 500 elite guests winced, covering their ears, their polite applause dying instantly. The spotlight operator kept the beam perfectly steady on table 89. I sat there, the heat of the light warming my face, my expression carefully arranged into a mask of polite expectation. I swirled the golden champagne in my glass, watching DeAndre's entire reality fracture. Kiara, DeAndre stammered. His voice cracked, the slick, arrogant tone completely replaced by genuine panic. He took a stumbling step backward, nearly tripping over the microphone cord. The perfectly tailored tuxedo suddenly looked like it was suffocating him. He pulled at his collar, his eyes darting frantically between me and the empty VIP seat where he had expected to find his savior. "You must have the wrong person," Beatrice, his mother, shouted. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. She gestured wildly toward me, her diamond bracelets catching the stray light. "This is my future daughter-in-law's estranged sister. She is a dropout. She sells soap. There is no way she is the CEO of Obsidian Vanguard." I set my glass down on the wobbly table. The sound was soft, but in the dead silence of the ballroom it felt like a gunshot. "Actually, Beatrice," I said, raising my voice just enough to carry over the murmurs, "I am the founder and CEO of Obsidian Vanguard. And it seems your son has a slight misunderstanding of what a hostile takeover actually entails." DeAndre did not wait for his mother to process that information. He practically threw himself off the side of the stage, ignoring the small set of stairs entirely. He landed heavily, scrambling to his feet and sprinting toward table 89. The crowd parted for him, a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity evident on their faces. Vivian, my mother, looked like she was going to have a stroke. She stood frozen, her eyes wide, watching her golden son-in-law race toward the daughter she had just tried to throw out. Jasmine, clutching her Vera Wang gown, looked completely bewildered, the narrative she had carefully constructed crumbling around her. Kiara DeAndre gasped, reaching my table. He was sweating profusely, the confident facade entirely gone. Please. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. He grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. Please, whatever you want, I will double it. Just do not do this here. Not in front of my family. Not in front of the investors. I looked at his desperate, pleading face. I remembered the years of subtle insults, the condescending remarks about my lack of ambition, the way he had encouraged Jasmine's cruelty. He had invited me here to be the punchline of their perfect wedding. He had expected me to cower in the shadows. I do not whisper, DeAndre, I said, my voice cold and clear. I raised a hand, signaling the DJ booth situated near the stage. The DJ, another piece of my meticulously planned evening, immediately killed the background music and hit a button on his console. A wireless microphone dropped from the ceiling grid, suspended by a thin, nearly invisible wire, landing perfectly in my outstretched hand. The ballroom gasped collectively at the theatricality of the move. I had paid the lighting and sound crew a small fortune to orchestrate this exact moment. I tapped the microphone twice. The sound echoed clearly through the massive speakers, commanding the attention of every single person in the room. I am Kiara Washington, I announced, my voice booming across the silent, shocked ballroom. I stood up slowly, ensuring every eye was on me. And DeAndre, you just lied to 500 of Atlanta's finest. DeAndre recoiled, his hands flying up as if to physically stop the words coming out of my mouth. Kiara, stop, he hissed, his face twisted in panic. You are ruining everything. I ignored him, keeping my gaze fixed on the crowd. DeAndre told you all that his firm is being acquired for $100 million by Obsidian Vanguard. I continued pacing slowly away from table 89. He painted a picture of incredible success, of a lucrative buyout that would secure his family's legacy. I paused, letting the tension build. The guests were hanging on every word, the scandal too delicious to ignore. But Obsidian Vanguard is not making DeAndre a millionaire. I stated, my voice dropping to a conversational yet deadly tone. His company is not worth $100 million. It is a hollow shell built on fraudulent numbers and non-existent assets. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. Beatrice let out a sharp cry, clutching Vivian's arm for support. Vivian looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. As of 9 o'clock this morning, I continued, raising the microphone slightly. Obsidian Vanguard initiated a corporate liquidation of DeAndre's firm. We did not buy his company. We bought his debt. We acquired the toxic loans he thought he had hidden in offshore accounts. And we are calling them in. All of them. I turned back to DeAndre, who was now trembling visibly. You have exactly $0 to your name, DeAndre. Your firm is bankrupt and your personal assets are frozen. You are not a successful executive. You are a man who just lost everything. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that only happens when an entire worldview is shattered simultaneously. The elite guests, the politicians, the doctors, the fraternity brothers. They all stared at DeAndre with a mixture of horror and revulsion. The smell of financial ruin was pungent, and in their world it was contagious. You are lying. The shriek shattered the silence. Jasmine tore through the crowd, her face contorted in rage. She hiked up the skirt of her heavy Vera Wang gown, stumbling over the delicate lace in her haste. Her immaculate updo was beginning to unravel, strands of hair falling across her face. She reached a nearby table, and in a blind panic snatched a heavy silver steak knife. The guests gasped, pulling back as Jasmine charged toward me, the knife clutched tightly in her hand. You are making this up, Jasmine screamed, her voice bordering on hysterical. You are just jealous. You have always been jealous. You could never afford a wedding like this, so you forged some fake documents to ruin my life. She lunged, the knife flashing under the spotlight. I did not move. I did not flinch. Before Jasmine could take another step, 3 men in plain black suits materialized from the shadows near the kitchen doors. They moved with terrifying speed and precision. One grabbed Jasmine's wrist, twisting it sharply until the knife clattered to the marble floor. The other two forced her down, pinning her arms behind her back and pressing her face into the cold stone. "Let me go," Jasmine shrieked, struggling uselessly against the men. "She is a liar. She is a broke, pathetic liar." The three men were my personal security detail hired specifically for this event, disguised as catering staff, until the moment they were needed. They held Jasmine firmly, their expressions completely blank. I looked down at my sister, her beautiful gown now tangled around her, her face pressed against the floor near table 89. The irony was palpable. "I do not forge documents," Jasmine, I said softly into the microphone. "And I do not need to be jealous of a woman marrying a bankrupt fraud. Release my daughter immediately." The booming voice echoed across the room, full of practiced authority and misplaced confidence. The crowd parted once more as Reginald, my father, stormed toward us. He was a sitting city councilman, a man who built his entire career on projecting an image of unshakable power and moral superiority. He pointed a thick finger at my security detail. "I am City Councilman Reginald Washington. Release her now, or I will have you all arrested for assault." The security guards looked to me for direction. I gave a slight nod and they released Jasmine, stepping back, but remaining close enough to intervene if necessary. Jasmine scrambled to her feet, sobbing, and threw herself into Reginald's arms. Reginald glared at me, his chest heaving. "Kiara, you have crossed a line," he bellowed, his voice designed to command a courtroom. "I will use every connection I have in this city. I will have your assets frozen. I will have you thrown in a federal penitentiary for corporate sabotage and slander." I smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of my lips. "You are going to freeze my assets, Reginald?" I asked, the microphone capturing the amusement in my voice. That is a bold threat from a man who currently has less than $5,000 in his checking account. Reginald's face hardened. "Do not play games with me, Kiara. I should have left you in the streets when you came begging for rent money 5 years ago. I knew you were nothing but trouble." The crowd murmured again, drinking in the family drama. Reginald was trying to play the victim, trying to frame me as the ungrateful, delinquent daughter. "I never begged for rent," I replied, my voice slicing through his bluster. "I came to warn you that your campaign accountant was stealing from you, and you threw me out because you were the one embezzling the funds. You needed a scapegoat and I was convenient." Reginald turned a concerning shade of purple. "That is a lie," he roared. "Manager," he turned to the hotel's general manager, who was hovering nervously near the edge of the crowd. "Call the police. Have this woman arrested for trespassing and defamation." The general manager, a slight man in a nervous sweat, stepped forward. He wrung his hands, his eyes darting between Reginald and me. "Councilman Washington, I apologize." The manager stammered, his voice trembling. "Arrest her," Reginald demanded, pointing at me again. "I cannot do that, sir," the manager said, taking a step back and bowing deeply toward me. "I cannot remove the owner of the hotel. Miss Washington bought this entire resort property 3 days ago." DeAndre stopped dead in his tracks. The silence stretching between us was absolute. I watched the realization dawn in his eyes, the slow, agonizing understanding that he had not just made a mistake, he had potentially destroyed his entire future. The crowd of elite guests, completely unaware of the financial nuances, remained silent, sensing the dramatic shift in the atmosphere. You cannot do this!" DeAndre stammered, his voice lacking its previous bravado. "You are bluffing. Obsidian Vanguard would never authorize a liquidation without notifying the board." I took a deliberate step toward him, the microphone still grasped firmly in my hand. "I do not bluff, DeAndre," I said, my voice echoing across the ballroom. "And as the founder and CEO of Obsidian Vanguard, I am the board. I authorized the liquidation myself. Your firm has been operating a dual ledger system, hiding massive liabilities while inflating asset values. It is a textbook fraud scheme, and we found it." Beatrice let out another sharp cry, this one filled with genuine despair. Vivian, who had been trying to blend into the background, looked like she might faint. The perfectly curated image of their elite alliance was shattering in front of 500 of their closest friends. I raised the microphone again, ensuring every word landed with maximum impact. "We did not buy your company, DeAndre. We bought the debt you used to fund your extravagant lifestyle. We own the loans on your luxury cars, the mortgage on your new penthouse, and the credit lines you maxed out to pay for this $2 million wedding. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Whispers broke out the elite guests, suddenly realizing they were witnessing a financial execution. "You are a liar." The scream tore through the ballroom, high-pitched and hysterical. Jasmine, having somehow managed to slip away from my security detail, was charging toward me again. She had abandoned the steak knife, but her face was contorted with a rage so intense it was almost unrecognizable. Her Vera Wang dress, previously a symbol of her triumph, now looked like a tangled, restrictive cage. "You are just a jealous, bitter failure," Jasmine shrieked, stopping a few feet away from me, her chest heaving. "You could never afford a life like mine, so you made up this ridiculous story to ruin my wedding. You are nothing. You hear me? Nothing." She was unraveling, completely unable to process the truth. Her entire identity, built on the illusion of superior wealth and status, was being dismantled. I looked at my sister, feeling a flicker of pity beneath my cold resolve. "I am not making any—" "Jasmine," I said softly, though the microphone carried the words clearly. "And I am not jealous. I am simply reclaiming what was stolen from me and ensuring that fraud does not go unpunished." Before Jasmine could launch another verbal attack, the crowd parted violently. Reginald, my father, pushed his way through, his face thunderous. He had finally recovered from the shock of the hotel manager's revelation and was now operating on pure, unadulterated fury. "Enough!" Reginald bellowed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. He marched toward me, pointing a thick, accusatory finger. "You listen to me, Kiara. I do not care what kind of fantasy you are living in, but you will not disrespect this family." He stopped next to Jasmine, pulling her protectively against his side. "I am a sitting city councilman," he declared, puffing out his chest. "I have connections you cannot even fathom. If you do not drop this absurd charade right now, I will personally see to it that you are investigated. I will use every favor I have to freeze your assets and have you thrown in a federal penitentiary for corporate sabotage." I watched him, my expression impassive. He was playing his favorite role, the powerful patriarch, using intimidation and threats to silence anyone who dared to challenge him. It was a tactic that had worked perfectly when I was 19 and terrified, but I was no longer that scared girl. "You are going to freeze my assets, Reginald?" I asked, the microphone amplifying the amusement in my voice. "That is a bold threat from a man who currently has less than $5,000 in his checking account." Reginald's face hardened, the color draining from his cheeks. "Do not play games with me, Kiara," he snarled. "I should have left you in the streets when you came begging for rent money 5 years ago. I knew you were nothing but trouble." The crowd murmured again, drinking in the family drama. Reginald was trying to play the victim, trying to frame me as the ungrateful, delinquent daughter who was repaying his generosity with malice. "I never begged for rent," I replied, my voice slicing through his bluster with absolute precision. "I came to warn you that your campaign accountant was stealing from you, and you threw me out because you were the one embezzling the funds. You needed a scapegoat and I was convenient." The silence that followed was deafening. The accusation of political corruption made publicly in front of Atlanta's elite hung in the air like a live grenade. Reginald turned a concerning shade of purple, his mouth opening and closing silently. "That is a lie," he roared, his voice cracking. "Manager." He turned, frantically searching for the hotel's general manager, who was hovering nervously near the edge of the crowd. "Call the police. Have this woman arrested for trespassing and defamation." The general manager, a slight man in a nervous sweat, stepped forward. He wrung his hands, his eyes darting between Reginald and me. "Councilman Washington, I apologize," the manager stammered, his voice trembling. "Arrest her," Reginald demanded, pointing at me again, his entire body shaking with rage. "I cannot do that, sir," the manager said, taking a step back and bowing deeply toward me. "I cannot remove the owner of the hotel. Miss Washington bought this entire resort property 3 days ago." Reginald froze, his finger still pointing at me. He stared at the manager, then back at me, the reality of the situation finally beginning to penetrate his arrogance. The power dynamic had shifted entirely, and he was completely unarmed. I turned my attention back to Vivian, who was still standing near the stage, looking pale and unsteady. The revelation that I owned the multi-million-dollar venue seemed to shatter her reality. She had spent her entire life chasing status, worshipping wealth, and judging me for my perceived lack of both. Now she was faced with the undeniable truth that I possessed more power and resources than she could ever dream of. Vivian's demeanor changed instantly. The aggressive, condescending matriarch vanished, replaced by a desperate, manipulative performance. She fell to her knees, crying fake dramatic tears. "Kiara, my beautiful daughter," Vivian wailed, reaching her hands toward me. "I always knew you were destined for greatness. Please, let's handle this as a family. We can talk about this quietly." The sudden switch to performative motherly concern was so transparent it almost made me laugh. She was trying to salvage the situation, hoping to appeal to a familial bond she had spent years destroying. I looked down at her, my expression cold. "We stopped being a family the day you threw me out, Vivian," I said softly into the microphone. "There is nothing left to discuss." Before Vivian could continue her performance, Beatrice DeAndre's mother reacted. She realized the ship was sinking rapidly, and her instinct for self-preservation kicked in. She violently turned on Vivian and Jasmine in front of the crowd, her diamonds flashing as she pointed an accusing finger. "Your daughter is marrying a fraud," Beatrice screamed, her voice shrill with panic. "This family is trash. DeAndre, we are leaving right now. We are not associating with these people for another second." She grabbed her designer purse and turned toward the exit, expecting DeAndre to follow her. But I wasn't finished. I laughed, a chilling, echoing sound that stopped Beatrice in her tracks. Leaving to go where Beatrice, I asked the microphone, amplifying the cold amusement in my voice. "I wasn't joking about your Martha's Vineyard estate, and that luxury condo in Buckhead Obsidian Vanguard bought the debt portfolio from your bank last week." Beatrice slowly turned back to face me, her eyes wide with terror. "You are legally homeless, Beatrice," I stated clearly, ensuring every guest heard the reality of her situation. "You have no assets, no credit, and nowhere to go." Beatrice gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. She swayed on her feet, the immense weight of her financial ruin crashing down upon her. The arrogant, untouchable matriarch was reduced to a trembling, terrified woman. DeAndre, witnessing the complete destruction of his mother and his own carefully constructed facade, panicked. He looked wildly around the room, his eyes darting from me to his weeping mother to the silent, judging crowd. He realized there was no escape, no way to salvage the situation. Without a word, he abandoned his mother and his bride. He made a mad dash for the service exit near table 89, grabbing a heavy duffel bag he had hidden under the towering wedding cake table earlier in the evening. He shoved past the waiter, knocking a tray of champagne glasses to the floor, and sprinted toward the kitchen doors, desperate to escape the consequences of his actions. He thought he could run. He thought he could take the stolen money and disappear. But I had anticipated every move. I did not even flinch as he ran. I simply snapped my fingers. The sharp snap of my fingers echoed over the chaotic murmurs of the ballroom. DeAndre hit the swinging metal doors of the kitchen at a full sprint, his heavy duffel bag clutched tightly against his chest. He shoved the doors open with a violent crash. Instead of his waiting getaway car, he collided with a solid wall of dark windbreakers. 5 federal agents wearing tactical vests, marked with the gold letters of the FBI and the SEC, stood shoulder to shoulder in the narrow service corridor. DeAndre stumbled backward, the duffel bag slipping from his slick, sweating grasp. The zipper split open as it hit the ground, sending thick stacks of banded $100 bills spilling onto the greasy kitchen tiles. 2 agents moved with practiced efficiency. They grabbed DeAndre by the shoulders, slammed him roughly against the stainless steel prep counter, and kicked his legs apart. The metallic click of handcuffs snapping around his wrists rang out over his pathetic, sobbing protests. I walked slowly toward the open kitchen doors, the hem of my bespoke suit brushing past the shattered glass of the champagne flutes he had knocked over during his frantic escape. The entire ballroom watched in stunned silence as I stood at the threshold, looking down at the man who tried to publicly humiliate me. "Did you really think I did not track the $5 million you siphoned from your client's pension funds?" I asked, my voice carrying clearly into the ballroom. "You thought you were so clever funneling that money through obscure shell companies in the Cayman Islands. But you forgot one crucial detail. I handed your completely unredacted dual-ledger accounting books directly to the regional director of the SEC, over a friendly game of golf last Sunday morning. DeAndre looked up at me, his face pressed uncomfortably against the cold metal of the prep counter. His eyes were wide with a terror so profound it stripped away every single ounce of his arrogant facade. "Kiara, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine that echoed in the corridor. "I can give the money back. I can make it right. You are my sister-in-law. You cannot let them take me." "I am not your sister-in-law," I replied coldly, staring down at his terrified face. "I am the executioner of your fraudulent empire. Take him." The federal agents hauled DeAndre to his feet and dragged him back through the main ballroom toward the front exit. The supposedly brilliant millionaire executive was paraded past 500 elite guests in federal handcuffs. He thrashed and wept loudly, dragging his expensive Italian leather shoes across the pristine marble floor, completely ruining the elaborate floral arrangements that lined the center aisle. The high society crowd physically pulled away from him as if he were radioactive, their faces twisted in absolute disgust and shock. Jasmine watched her perfect husband to be getting dragged away like a common street criminal. She let out a guttural, raw scream that tore through the remaining shreds of dignity in the room. "Daddy, do something," Jasmine shrieked, turning her manic rage back toward our father. "Call your political donors right now. Call the local judges. You have to bail him out. You cannot let them take my husband away in front of all my sorority sisters." Reginald pulled his smartphone from his jacket pocket, his chest puffing out with that familiar hollow authority he used to intimidate people. "Do not worry," Princess Reginald boomed, making sure the lingering elite guests could hear his declarations of power. "I will call my top shadow donor right now. He is a billionaire real estate developer who owes me a massive favor. I will mortgage the historic family estate if I have to. I will secure the cash, hire the most expensive defense lawyers in Atlanta, and have DeAndre out on bail before midnight." Jasmine let out a breathless sob of pure relief, clinging tightly to her father's arm. Vivian, who had been kneeling on the floor in a state of deep shock, slowly scrambled to her feet, her eyes gleaming with a sudden renewed sense of hope. "Yes," Reginald Vivian urged, her voice trembling, but forceful. "Call him immediately. Show everyone in this room that this family cannot be broken by a jealous college dropout." Reginald aggressively dialed the number on his phone and hit the speaker button, holding the device up high like a victorious trophy. The line began to ring through the silent ballroom. One ring, two. Simultaneously, a sharp cell phone ringtone pierced the tense air. It was not coming from the grand speakers. It was coming directly from my hand. I slowly reached into the tailored pocket of my trousers and pulled out my personal secure mobile device. The screen was illuminated brightly in the dim, romantic lighting of the ballroom. I held the phone up so Reginald could see it clearly. The caller ID flashing on my screen was unmistakably clear. It read, "City Councilman Reginald Washington." The third ring echoed from Reginald's phone, syncing flawlessly with the third ring emanating from my device. Reginald froze in place. His thumb hovered awkwardly over his screen. His eyes darted rapidly from his phone to my phone, the gears in his mind grinding to a violent, catastrophic halt. The arrogant sneer on his face melted away, instantly replaced by an expression of pure, suffocating horror. I pressed the bright green answer button on my screen. "Yes, Councilman," I said directly into my phone. My voice echoed back simultaneously through the speaker on Reginald's device, loud and crystal clear for every single guest to hear. Reginald's hand began to shake so violently, he nearly dropped his phone. "You," he whispered, the terrifying realization draining the last remaining color from his cheeks. "You are the shadow donor I have been borrowing from. You really should not sign blind limited liability contracts without reading the fine print carefully, Dad," I said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. "You were so utterly desperate to maintain your phony wealthy lifestyle. You blindly mortgaged the historic family estate to a faceless shell company just to pay for this $2 million fake wedding. A shell company that is wholly owned by Obsidian Vanguard." Vivian let out a strangled gasp, stumbling backward into a linen-covered cocktail table and sending glasses crashing to the ground. Reginald could not speak a single word. He just stared at the phone in his trembling hand as if it had turned into a venomous snake. "You do not own the estate anymore, Reginald," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. You completely defaulted on the secondary clauses of that loan, the exact moment your future son-in-law was arrested for federal fraud on these premises. The legal eviction notice was taped firmly to the heavy oak front doors of your beloved mansion exactly 20 minutes ago. You have until midnight to pack your bags and vacate my property forever. Vivian let out a piercing, ear-shattering shriek. She clutched her chest tightly, her eyes rolling back into her head, and she fainted for real this time, hitting the cold marble floor with a heavy thud. Not a single person in the massive crowd moved to help her up. They began walking out of the ballroom in droves, actively mocking Jasmine and Vivian as they passed by. The high society they had worshipped and ruthlessly sacrificed me for was now treating them like a cheap circus act. Jasmine completely lost her mind. Her entire identity, the rich wife, the perfect sorority legacy, the golden daughter was vaporized in a single instant. She began tearing frantically at the delicate lace of her custom Vera Wang dress, ripping the expensive fabric as she screamed hysterically. She dropped heavily to her hands and knees, crawling pitifully across the floor toward my designer shoes. Please, Kiara, Jasmine begged, her face slick with tears and ruined designer makeup. I will do anything you want. Let me stay in the pool house. Let me clean the floors every day. Do not make me live on the dangerous streets. Please, you are my sister. You cannot do this to your own blood. I looked down at the sobbing woman who had just tried to force me into a dirty waiter's apron. I slowly reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a set of rusty, jagged keys attached to a cheap plastic keychain. I tossed them carelessly onto the floor. They landed with a sharp clink right next to Jasmine's tear-stained face. I bought back the mold-infested trailer in the swamps that you and Mom forced me to live in when I was 19. The roof still leaks badly when it rains, and the heating system does not work at all. The rent is due on the first of every month. Jasmine stared at the rusty, jagged keys resting on the cold marble floor. The cheap plastic keychain attached to them seemed to mock the heavy lace of her custom Vera Wang gown. She did not reach for them. Her hands, trembling uncontrollably, remained pressed against the ground as the reality of her new life settled over her like a suffocating blanket. The mold-infested trailer in the swamps. That was her entire future now. The elite guests surrounding us, the people she had spent her entire life trying to impress, offered no sympathy. Instead, blinding smartphone camera flashes illuminated her spectacular downfall. High society judges, legacy fraternity alumni, and wealthy surgeons were actively recording her humiliation, whispering vicious insults that echoed through the vast ballroom. The golden child of Atlanta had been permanently stripped of her sparkling, unearned crown. I stood completely still, looking down at her ruined makeup, and I realized that I felt absolutely nothing for her. A low, pathetic groan suddenly broke the thick tension in the room. Vivian, my mother, was slowly regaining consciousness. She blinked rapidly, her shaking hands flying to her severely disheveled hair. She pushed herself up onto her elbows, her eyes darting frantically around the ballroom. She saw Reginald standing frozen with his cell phone, his political career entirely annihilated. She saw Jasmine kneeling on the floor, weeping over a set of trailer keys. And then her gaze locked onto me. I stood tall, flanked by my undercover security detail, the absolute master of the room. The shift in Vivian was instantaneous and terrifying to watch. The aggressive, domineering matriarch who had thrown me out into the street vanished completely. In her place emerged a desperate, calculating woman willing to say absolutely anything to survive. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring her ruined emerald green evening gown, and stumbled toward me with her arms outstretched. "Kiara, my beautiful, brilliant daughter," Vivian cried out, forcing thick tears to stream down her cheeks. Her voice was shrill, desperate to carry over the murmurs of the crowd. "I always knew you were destined for true greatness. I knew it from the moment you were born. Everything I did, pushing you away, being hard on you, it was all to make you strong. And look at you now. You built an empire. You own this entire resort. Please, sweetheart, let us handle this as a family. We can fix this. You have a massive company now, and your father and I can help you run it. You belong with us." The audacity of her performance was staggering. She was attempting to rewrite 30 years of emotional abuse and financial manipulation in 30 seconds. She took another step forward, reaching out to grab my hands, but my security guards immediately stepped in, blocking her path with their broad shoulders. "Do not touch me, Vivian," I said, my voice echoing coldly through the ballroom. "We stopped being the exact moment you chose to fund a lavish lifestyle over your own child. You threw me to the wolves so you could wear designer clothes and host elite country club dinners. You chose your legacy sorority sisters over my survival. You do not get to claim my success now that your fraudulent empire has turned to dust. You are not a proud mother. You are a bankrupt squatter who has until midnight to vacate my property." Vivian let out a strangled gasp, her hands flying to her chest. She looked around the ballroom, frantically seeking a single friendly face, a single ally to defend her. But the wealthy guests she had spent decades courting simply turned their backs, their faces masked with disgust. She was a social pariah, completely isolated. Suddenly, Beatrice DeAndre's mother snapped out of her paralyzed shock. She had watched her son get handcuffed by federal agents and paraded through the room. She had watched Reginald lose his estate and Vivian lose her mind. Beatrice was a woman who survived by aligning herself with power, and she recognized immediately that the Washington family was a sinking ship. Her instinct for self-preservation overrode every ounce of loyalty she had pretended to have. Beatrice violently turned on Vivian and Jasmine, her diamond bracelets clinking sharply as she pointed an accusing finger. "You disgusting, manipulative people!" Beatrice shrieked, her voice cutting through the heavy atmosphere. She marched toward Vivian, her eyes blazing with fury. "You set my son up. You promised him a wealthy political family, but your entire life is built on stolen money and lies. Your daughter is marrying a fraud because she is a fraud herself. This family is nothing but trash." Beatrice spun around to face the federal agents who were holding DeAndre near the kitchen doors. "DeAndre, we are leaving right now," she commanded, completely ignoring the fact that he was wearing federal handcuffs. "We are not associating with these pathetic broke criminals for another second. I will call our legal team. We will distance ourselves from the Washington name completely. We are Atlanta elite, and we will not be dragged down by this garbage." I watched Beatrice puff out her chest, desperately clinging to her old money arrogance. She genuinely believed her generational wealth made her immune to the carnage unfolding in the ballroom. She thought she could simply walk away and resume her luxurious life of judging others. I let out a slow, chilling laugh. The sound echoed off the high ceilings, dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. Beatrice stopped her tirade, turning to glare at me with profound hatred. "Leaving to go where?" Beatrice I asked, taking a deliberate step toward her. "Did you really think my investigation stopped with your son's corporate fraud?" Beatrice stiffened, her arrogant posture faltering slightly. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, though her voice betrayed a tremor of fear. "We have nothing to do with your petty family squabbles. My family has real wealth." I smiled, shaking my head slowly. "You had wealth, Beatrice. Past tense. I was not joking earlier when I mentioned your Martha's Vineyard estate, and that ultra-luxury penthouse condo you occupy in Buckhead, the one you boast about at every single charity gala." I pulled a folded document from the inner pocket of my suit jacket and held it up. Beatrice's eyes locked onto the paper, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "Your late husband left you drowning in hidden debt," Beatrice I stated clearly, ensuring the entire ballroom heard every single word. "You have been taking out massive high-interest loans against your properties, just to maintain the illusion of your elite lifestyle. You thought you could keep rolling the debt over indefinitely. But you made a critical error. You borrowed from a private banking group that specializes in distressed assets." Beatrice began to shake her hands, clutching her pearl necklace so tightly the string looked ready to snap. "Obsidian Vanguard bought the entire debt portfolio from your bank on Tuesday morning." I continued, my voice merciless and precise. "We called in the loans immediately. You missed the 72-hour payment window. The foreclosure on your Martha's Vineyard property was finalized today. The eviction proceedings for your Buckhead condo have already been processed through the municipal court." "No," Beatrice whispered, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. "That is impossible. You cannot do that." "It is already done," I replied coldly. "You do not have a legal team on retainer anymore, Beatrice, because your accounts are frozen. You do not have a home to return to tonight. You are legally entirely homeless." The generational wealth you used to mock and belittle people is completely gone. You are exactly what you just called my mother, broke. Beatrice let out a devastating, breathless wail. Her knees buckled and she collapsed onto the floor, her expensive gown pooling around her. The ultimate untouchable matriarch of Atlanta's high society was reduced to a weeping, ruined mess on the floor of my hotel. The elite guests watched in absolute paralyzed silence, terrified that I might turn my gaze on them next. DeAndre watched his mother fall to the ground. He watched the absolute destruction of his family's legacy, his wealth, and his freedom. He saw me systematically dismantle every single person who had ever wronged me, leaving them with absolutely nothing. The reality of his impending 15-year prison sentence crashed down on him, triggering a massive, blinding surge of pure adrenaline and panic. The federal agents holding him near the kitchen doors had momentarily relaxed their grip, distracted by the spectacular collapse of the two matriarchs in the center of the room. DeAndre realized this was his one and only chance. In a final desperate act of absolute cowardice, he violently shoved his own mother out of his mind and slammed his shoulder into the federal agent on his left. The sudden brutal impact broke the agent's grip just long enough for DeAndre to tear himself away. He ignored the main exit, knowing it was heavily guarded. Instead, he made a mad dash for the service exit located near the side terrace. As he sprinted past the towering, untouched six-tier wedding cake, he dropped to his knees and blindly reached under the draped tablecloth. He emerged, dragging a secondary heavy canvas duffel bag he had secretly hidden there hours before the ceremony began. The bag was weighed down with stolen offshore hard drives and untraceable bearer bonds. Panting heavily, the terrified groom bolted toward the dark terrace doors, leaving his screaming bride and weeping mother behind. The crowd erupted into chaotic gasps as DeAndre sprinted across the polished marble floor. He clutched the heavy canvas duffel bag against his chest, like a lifeline, his expensive Italian leather shoes slipping slightly on the spilled champagne. He was abandoning everything: his weeping mother, his hysterical bride, his entire carefully constructed life. All that mattered to him now was the stolen offshore hard drives and the untraceable bearer bonds hidden inside that bag. He charged toward the heavy wooden doors leading to the terrace, his eyes wide with the desperate feral panic of a cornered animal. I stood perfectly still in the center of the ballroom. I did not flinch. I did not yell for security to stop him. I simply raised my right hand and snapped my fingers. The sharp, crisp sound echoed clearly over the murmuring crowd. DeAndre hit the heavy oak terrace doors at a full, desperate sprint, shoving them open with all of his body weight. He expected the cool night air and a clear path to freedom. Instead, he collided violently with a solid, unyielding wall of dark tactical gear. 5 federal agents, wearing heavy windbreakers, stamped with the bright yellow letters of the FBI and the SEC, stood shoulder to shoulder on the terrace. They completely blocked his only avenue of escape. DeAndre let out a strangled, pathetic gasp and stumbled backward, his momentum entirely broken. The heavy canvas duffel bag slipped from his sweaty grasp and hit the stone floor with a loud thud. The zipper burst open upon impact. Stacks of banded $100 bills, passports under fake names, and encrypted silver hard drives spilled out, scattering across the terrace for everyone inside the ballroom to see. 2 federal agents moved forward with terrifying, practiced efficiency. They grabbed DeAndre by the shoulders, spun him around roughly, and slammed him face first against the thick glass of the terrace windows. The dull, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs snapping tightly around his wrists rang out over the terrified whispers of the elite wedding guests. I walked slowly toward the terrace doors. The crowd parted instantly, giving me a wide berth, as if stepping too close might somehow implicate them in his crimes. The hem of my bespoke suit brushed past the ruined, crushed flower arrangements that had cost my father thousands of dollars. The entire ballroom watched in absolute paralyzed silence as I stood at the threshold looking down at the man who had tried to publicly humiliate me just minutes earlier. "Did you really think I did not track the $5 million you siphoned from your client's pension funds?" I asked. My voice carried clearly into the quiet ballroom, amplified by the sheer authority of the moment. "You thought you were so incredibly clever, DeAndre. You thought you could funnel the retirement savings of hardworking teachers and nurses through obscure shell companies in the Cayman Islands and no one would ever notice. DeAndre pressed his sweating forehead against the cool glass, his chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the reality of his total destruction. "You forgot one crucial detail," I continued, my tone merciless and precise. "Obsidian Vanguard does not just buy companies, we dissect them." I handed your completely unredacted dual-ledger accounting books directly to the regional director of the SEC over a friendly round of golf last Sunday morning. We went through every single fraudulent transaction by the fifth hole. They have been building this federal indictment all week, just waiting for the perfect moment to execute the arrest warrant. DeAndre slowly turned his head to look at me. His eyes were wide with a terror so profound it stripped away every single ounce of his former arrogance. The slick, confident executive was entirely gone, replaced by a broken, terrified criminal facing decades behind bars. "Kiara, please," DeAndre begged. His voice cracked into a high-pitched, pathetic whine that echoed off the glass doors. "I can give all the money back. I can make it right. You are my sister-in-law. We are family now. You cannot let them take me away." I stared down at his desperate, tear-stained face. I felt absolutely no pity for him. He had built his entire false empire on the broken lives of innocent people, and he had planned to use my sister to elevate his own social standing. "I am not your sister-in-law," I replied coldly. "I am the executioner of your fraudulent empire. Take him away." The federal agents hauled DeAndre to his feet. Instead of leading him out through the terrace exit, the lead agent turned him around and marched him directly back through the main ballroom toward the grand front entrance. The supposedly brilliant millionaire executive was paraded past 500 of Atlanta's most elite guests in federal handcuffs. DeAndre thrashed and wept loudly, dragging his expensive shoes across the pristine marble floor. He begged for anyone to help him. But the high society crowd physically pulled away from him, as if he were carrying a deadly plague. Politicians, doctors, and legacy fraternity alumni averted their eyes, their faces twisted in absolute disgust and shock. In their world, financial ruin was bad, but public federal indictment was a terminal disease. Beatrice, who had just learned of her own total bankruptcy, watched her son being dragged away like a common street criminal. She let out a guttural, raw scream and buried her face in her hands, unable to bear the absolute humiliation. Her precious generational wealth and her golden child were both destroyed in the span of 5 minutes. Jasmine knelt on the floor near table 89, clutching the ripped layers of her custom Vera Wang wedding dress. She watched her perfect husband to be get hauled out the front doors, the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers illuminating the grand lobby. Her entire carefully constructed universe had just been violently ripped apart. The lavish lifestyle and social dominance she craved were completely gone. She slowly turned her gaze away from the exit and locked eyes with our father. Reginald stood frozen near the edge of the dance floor, his political career hanging by a thread. Jasmine scrambled to her feet, her immaculate updo completely ruined strands of hair sticking to her tear-soaked face. "Daddy, do something!" Jasmine shrieked. She sprinted toward him, her voice tearing through the remaining shreds of dignity in the room. "You cannot just stand there and watch them ruin my wedding. Call your political donors right now. You have to bail him out before the press gets a hold of this." Reginald looked around the room, acutely aware of the smartphones still recording every second of this disaster. His instinct for self-preservation clashed violently with his need to maintain his patriarchal authority. He could not look weak in front of his wealthy constituents, even as his own financial crimes threatened to surface. "You cannot let them take my husband away in front of all my sorority sisters," Jasmine wailed, grabbing the lapels of his tuxedo and shaking him frantically. "Fix this right now." Reginald gently but firmly peeled Jasmine's hands off his jacket, smoothing the fabric to regain some semblance of control. He puffed out his chest, summoning that familiar hollow authority he used to intimidate people on the council floor. "Do not worry," Princess Reginald boomed, making absolutely certain the lingering elite guests could hear his loud declarations of power. "I will not let our family name be dragged through the mud by some overzealous federal agents. I will fix this immediately." He pulled his smartphone from his inner pocket, his thumb swiping aggressively across the screen. "I will call my top shadow donor right now," Reginald announced, his voice dripping with desperate arrogance. He is a billionaire real estate developer who owes me a massive favor for pushing through his zoning permits last year. He has deep pockets and even deeper connections. Jasmine let out a breathless sob of pure relief, clinging tightly to her father's arm. Vivian, who had been sitting paralyzed on a nearby chair after regaining consciousness, suddenly looked up. Her eyes gleamed with a sudden renewed sense of delusional hope. "Yes, Reginald," Vivian urged, her voice trembling but forceful. "Call him immediately. We need cash for the best defense lawyers in Atlanta. Show everyone in this room that this family cannot be broken by a jealous, bitter woman. We will have DeAndre out on bail before midnight, and we will destroy her for doing this to us." Reginald confidently pulled up the highly private contact number. "I will mortgage the historic family estate if I have to," he promised Jasmine. "The property holds massive equity. My donor will advance us the $10 million we need. We will handle this quietly, and tomorrow, we will definitively launch a massive public relations campaign to fully clear our family name." Reginald stood in the center of the devastated ballroom, his chest puffed out desperately, trying to project the aura of a powerful, untouchable political titan. The remaining guests, wealthy doctors, legacy fraternity, alumni and local judges, watched him with a mixture of morbid fascination and deep skepticism. His future son-in-law had just been dragged out in federal handcuffs. His wife was hyperventilating near a ruined flower arrangement, and his other daughter was clawing at the tattered remains of her Vera Wang wedding dress. But Reginald refused to accept defeat. He believed his political connections made him invincible. He held his sleek smartphone high in the air, ensuring the screen was visible to the whispering crowd. He pressed the speakerphone icon with an aggressive theatrical jab of his thumb. "Listen to me, Jasmine!" Reginald boomed, his deep voice carrying easily over the tense murmurs of the ballroom. "I am not going to let this jealous, vindictive woman destroy the Washington family name. I am calling my top shadow donor right this second. He is a billionaire real estate mogul. He owes me his entire commercial empire because I personally fast-tracked every single one of his zoning permits through the city council." Jasmine looked up from the floor, her tear-streaked face gleaming with a sudden desperate hope. "Tell him we need $10 million, Daddy," she begged, her voice hoarse from screaming. "Tell him we need the best defense attorneys in the state. We have to get DeAndre out of federal custody before the morning news cycle. I will get $20 million if I have to," Reginald promised, his arrogance swelling as he played to his captive audience. "I will leverage the historic family estate. The Washington Manor has been in our bloodline for 4 generations. It holds massive untapped equity. My donor will wire the cash into my offshore accounts before midnight, and we will crush this ridiculous liquidation stunt." He tapped the call button. The loud, rhythmic sound of the dial tone echoed from his phone's speaker, filling the silent ballroom. One ring. The sound bounced off the crystal chandeliers and the high-arched ceilings. Reginald smiled smugly, glaring at me as if anticipating my immediate surrender. He genuinely believed that his secret billionaire backer would swoop in to save his fraudulent, crumbling world. 2 rings. Simultaneously, a sharp, crisp cell phone ringtone pierced the heavy atmosphere. It was not coming from the grand overhead speakers. It was coming directly from my hand. I slowly reached into the tailored inner pocket of my bespoke jacket and pulled out my personal encrypted mobile device. The screen was illuminated brightly, casting a harsh, cold glow in the dim, romantic lighting of the wedding reception. The ringtone emanating from my device matched the exact, precise rhythm of the dial tone echoing from Reginald's speakerphone. 3 rings. Reginald froze in place. His thick thumb hovered awkwardly over his screen. His eyes darted rapidly from his own phone to the device glowing in my hand. The gears in his mind began grinding to a violent, catastrophic halt. The arrogant, untouchable sneer on his face melted away, instantly replaced by an expression of pure, suffocating confusion. He tried to rationalize it. He tried to convince himself it was merely a bizarre, cruel coincidence. He abruptly pressed the red button on his screen, ending the call. The exact millisecond he ended his call, the ringing from my encrypted mobile device stopped. The silence that descended upon the ballroom was absolute and terrifying. Not a single guest dared to breathe. The elite crowdmasters of reading shifting power dynamics stared at Reginald with widening eyes. Reginald swallowed hard, a bead of cold sweat rolling down his temple. His hands began to shake slightly. He aggressively dialed the highly private contact number a second time, hitting the speakerphone button again. One ring. Instantly, my phone lit up, the crisp ringtone echoing across the marble floor. I held the device up high, rotating my wrist slowly so Reginald could see the screen clearly. The caller ID, flashing in bright bold letters on my display, was unmistakably clear. It read, City Councilman Reginald Washington. The color drained entirely from Reginald's face, leaving him looking like a hollow, terrified ghost. His knees actually buckled for a fraction of a second before he caught himself. The phone in his hand shook so violently, he nearly dropped it onto the shattered glass covering the floor. You, Reginald whispered. His voice was completely stripped of its booming political authority. It was a weak, pathetic rasp that barely carried past the first row of staring guests. You are the shadow donor I have been borrowing from. I pressed the bright green answer button on my screen. Yes, Councilman, I said, speaking directly into my phone, too. My voice echoed back simultaneously through the speaker on Reginald's device, loud, cold, and crystal clear for every single guest to hear. The feedback loop created a chilling metallic resonance that hung in the air like a death sentence. You really should not sign blind limited liability contracts without reading the fine print carefully, Dad, I said, lowering the phone from my ear and taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. You were so utterly desperate to maintain your phony, wealthy lifestyle. You were terrified that your elite country club friends would discover you were drowning in campaign debt. Reginald could not speak. He just stared at the phone in his trembling hand, as if it had turned into a venomous snake. He slowly lowered it, his eyes wide with unadulterated terror. You blindly mortgaged the historic family estate to a faceless shell company just to pay for this $2 million fake wedding. I continued, my voice slicing through his destroyed ego with absolute precision. You took out high-interest predatory loans to fund Jasmine's ridiculous Vera Wang dress, the imported champagne, and the string quartet. You thought you were outsmarting the banking system. You thought your political immunity protected you from financial scrutiny. Vivian, who had been clinging to a linen-covered cocktail table for support, let out a strangled, breathless gasp. She stumbled backward, her expensive emerald green evening gown catching on the edge of a shattered chair. That shell company, I stated clearly, ensuring the entire ballroom heard every single word, is wholly owned by Obsidian Vanguard. A collective, horrified murmur rippled through the crowd of high society guests. The politicians and real estate developers in the room understood exactly what that meant. Reginald had not just borrowed money, he had handed the literal deed to his legacy directly to the daughter he had ruthlessly discarded. You manipulated the system! Reginald suddenly shouted, a final desperate surge of panic fueling his voice. This is illegal. You cannot hide behind a shell company to steal your own family's ancestral home. I will take you to court. I will expose your predatory lending practices. There was nothing predatory about it, Reginald, I replied, my expression impassive. You sought out the loan. You willingly signed the paperwork. You offered the estate as collateral because you had absolutely zero liquid assets left. I simply approved the transfer of funds. You took my money to pay for a wedding that you explicitly banned me from attending. Jasmine let out a guttural, raw scream. She covered her ears with her hands, shaking her head violently from side to side. No, 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 Daddy, tell her she is lying. Tell her we still own the house. We are the Washingtons. We are Atlanta royalty. I looked down at my sister, feeling a flicker of absolute disgust. She was still clinging to a title that no longer existed. You do not own the estate anymore, Reginald, I stated, my voice echoing with absolute brutal finality. You completely defaulted on the secondary clauses of that loan agreement, the exact moment your future son-in-law was arrested for federal fraud on these premises. The morality and criminal association clauses were activated immediately. Vivian clutched her chest tightly, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Kiara, please, she wheezed, her manipulative facade crumbling into genuine visceral panic. That house has been in the family for 4 generations. It is our history. It is our bloodline. You cannot take our home. You threw me out of that home 10 years ago, I reminded her, my tone merciless. You threw my belongings onto the front lawn in the pouring rain because I refused to pledge your legacy sorority. You told me I was a disgrace to the bloodline. You told me to never return. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the stunned crowd. The guests who had eagerly participated in my humiliation earlier in the evening were now shrinking back into the shadows, terrified of drawing my attention. The legal eviction notice was taped firmly to the heavy oak front doors of your beloved mansion exactly 20 minutes ago, I announced, delivering the ultimate crushing hammer blow. The locks have already been changed by my private security contractors. Your remaining belongings are currently being boxed up by a moving crew. Reginald dropped his phone. It hit the marble floor, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of cracks. His shoulders slumped forward, his entire body appearing to deflate. The powerful, commanding politician was completely gone. In his place stood a broken, bankrupt old man who had just lost everything he valued. You have until midnight to pack whatever fits into your vehicles, I concluded, turning my gaze back to Vivian. After that, you are trespassing on Obsidian Vanguard corporate property. Vivian let out a piercing, ear-shattering shriek. The absolute loss of her societal throne, her wealth, and her home was too much for her fragile, image-obsessed mind to comprehend. Her eyes rolled to the back of her head. Her knees buckled violently, and she collapsed onto the floor, hitting the cold marble with a heavy, ungraceful thud. She had fainted for real this time. Not a single person in the massive crowd moved to help her up. The elite guests, the people she had spent her entire life trying to impress and dominate, simply stared down at her unconscious body with masked contempt. They began walking out of the ballroom in droves, actively whispering and pointing at the ruined family. The high society they had worshipped and ruthlessly sacrificed me for was now treating them like a discarded piece of trash. Jasmine completely lost her mind. Her entire identity, the rich wife, the perfect sorority legacy, the golden daughter, was vaporized in a single catastrophic instant. She began tearing frantically at the delicate lace of her custom Vera Wang dress, ripping the expensive fabric as she screamed hysterically. She dropped heavily to her hands and knees, crawling pitifully across the floor toward my designer shoes. Please, Kiara, Jasmine begged, her face slick with tears and ruined designer makeup. I will do anything you want. Let me stay in the pool house. Let me clean the floors every day. Do not make me live on the dangerous streets. Please, you are my sister. You cannot do this to your own blood. I looked down at the sobbing woman who had just tried to force me into a dirty waiter's apron, feeling the absolute, undeniable surge of total victory. Jasmine's hands clawed violently at the pristine white fabric of her custom Vera Wang gown. The delicate imported French lace tore with a loud, sickening rip that echoed over the murmurs of the retreating guests. She did not care about the expensive dress anymore. The dress was a symbol of a life that no longer existed. She yanked frantically at the sweetheart neckline, her manicured nails leaving angry red scratches across her collarbone. Her breathing grew rapid and ragged, escalating into full-blown hyperventilation. The perfect golden daughter, the untouchable sorority legacy, who had spent her entire life looking down on everyone else from her unearned pedestal, was completely unraveling on the cold marble floor. It is gone, Jasmine wheezed, rocking back and forth on her hands and knees. The house, the money, DeAndre. It is all gone. My friends are going to laugh at me. They are going to kick me out of the alumni chapter. The country club will ban me forever. Her obsession with social optics remained her only priority, even as her husband sat in a federal holding cell and her parents faced imminent homelessness. Jasmine grabbed a fistful of her expensive hair extensions and pulled hard, letting out another piercing, unhinged scream. She beat her fists against the shattered glass and spilled champagne, uncaring, as the sharp shards sliced deep into her palms. Blood mixed with the expensive alcohol, staining the pure white silk of her ruined wedding dress. Around us, the spectacle drew the remaining elite guests back from the exits. They did not return to offer comfort or assistance to the fallen bride. They returned to consume the carnage. Powerful judges, renowned plastic surgeons, and wealthy legacy fraternity alumni pulled out their smartphones. The harsh, bright flashes of their cameras illuminated Jasmine's spectacular public breakdown. They were actively recording every single second of her ultimate humiliation, broadcasting the definitive end of the Washington family dynasty to every exclusive group chat and social media platform in Atlanta. Look at her, a prominent real estate developer sneered, holding his phone up high to capture the perfect angle. Her father owes me $100,000 for his last political campaign. I always knew they were living on borrowed time. Just a bunch of broke frauds playing dress-up in designer clothes. Did you see Vivian faint? An impeccably dressed socialite mocked her diamond earrings catching the harsh camera lights. She spent the last 3 years bragging about that historic estate at every charity gala we attended. Now she is getting evicted by her own estranged daughter. It is absolute poetry. I am posting this video right now. The high society that Vivian and Jasmine had ruthlessly worshipped, the very people they had sacrificed my well-being to impress, were now treating them like a cheap, pathetic circus act. There was no loyalty in their world, only the brutal transactional exchange of wealth and power. The moment the Washingtons lost their financial leverage, they were instantly discarded. The guests stepped carelessly over Jasmine's sprawling ruined dress as they finally headed for the valet stand, chuckling and sharing the videos that would guarantee my family remained social pariahs for the rest of their miserable lives. Jasmine heard the mocking laughter. The sound hit her like a physical blow, snapping her out of her manic rocking. She snapped her head up, her tear-streaked face twisting in absolute panic as she watched her so-called elite friends walking away. The reality of her total isolation crashed down on her shoulders. She had no husband, no money, no home, and absolutely no allies left in the world. Her entire existence had been wiped out. She slowly turned her gaze back to me. I stood perfectly still, flanked by my private security team, watching her destruction with cold, clinical detachment. Jasmine scrambled forward on her hands and knees. She crawled through the spilled wine and broken glass, leaving a trail of smeared blood and dirt across the pristine floor. She threw herself at my feet, her hands desperately grabbing at the hem of my tailored trousers. Her fingers slipped off the expensive fabric, leaving small, pathetic stains on the tops of my designer shoes. "Please, Kiara," Jasmine begged, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate shriek. "Please, you have to save me. I will do anything you want. I will publicly apologize to you right now. I will get on a microphone and tell everyone I was wrong about you." I looked down at her, my expression completely impassive. "You are not sorry, Jasmine. You are just broke. There is a massive difference." "No, I mean it," she sobbed, pressing her forehead against the toes of my shoes. "I am sorry. I never wanted to treat you badly. Mom and Dad made me do it. They forced me to compete with you. Just please let me stay in the pool house at the estate. I will not bother you. Let me clean the floors every single day. Let me do your laundry and cook your meals. Just do not make me live on the dangerous streets. Please, you are my sister. You cannot do this to your own blood. I have never worked a real job in my life. I do not know how to survive out there in the real world." She clung to my ankles, sobbing uncontrollably. The arrogant woman who had marched up to table 89 and ordered me to wear a dirty waiter's apron was entirely gone. She was begging for the exact same scraps of mercy she had aggressively denied me a decade ago. I did not kick her away. I did not yell. I simply looked down at the sobbing, broken woman at my feet and let the heavy silence stretch out. I allowed her to sit in the absolute terror of the unknown for several long seconds. I wanted her to feel the crushing weight of powerlessness that I had felt when they locked me out in the cold. I slowly reached into the right pocket of my jacket. My fingers brushed past the sleek titanium of my Centurion card and closed around a cold, heavy object. I pulled my hand out and held my fist suspended in the air right above Jasmine's head. "You are right about one thing, Jasmine," I said, my voice echoing clearly over her pathetic whimpers. "I am not heartless. I would never leave my own flesh and blood to freeze on the dangerous streets of Atlanta. That would be cruel." Jasmine gasped, a sudden, desperate light sparking in her bloodshot eyes. She looked up at my closed fist, a fragile, delusional smile breaking through her tears. She genuinely believed I was about to hand her the keys to the luxurious pool house. She thought the biological bond of sisterhood would magically override a lifetime of relentless abuse and betrayal. I opened my hand. A set of rusty, jagged keys attached to a cheap, faded plastic keychain dropped from my palm. They fell through the air and hit the marble floor with a sharp, heavy clink, landing exactly 1 inch from Jasmine's tear-stained nose. Jasmine stared at the keys. The hopeful smile instantly vanished from her face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. She recognized that cheap plastic keychain. It was the exact same keychain Vivian had tossed at me 10 years ago when they formally kicked me out of the historic family estate and banished me from their lives. I bought back the mold-infested trailer in the swamps that you and Mom forced me to live in when I was 19. I stated, my voice slicing through the air with ruthless surgical precision. The one located right next to the industrial waste runoff. The one with the broken locks, the shattered windows, and the severe roach infestation. Jasmine let out a low, whimpering moan, her hands trembling as she hovered over the rusty keys. She remembered that trailer. She had driven past it once in her brand-new Porsche, actively laughing at the sight of me, hauling buckets of clean water because the plumbing had completely failed. I made absolutely sure the property management company did not renovate a single thing. I continued kneeling down slightly, so I was at eye level with her terrified face. The roof still leaks badly when it rains heavily. The heating system does not work at all. The floorboards in the kitchen are rotting straight through to the muddy ground beneath. It is exactly the way you left me to rot while you attended luxury galas. Jasmine shook her head frantically, refusing to touch the keys. No, no, Kiara, please. I cannot live there. It is not safe. It is filthy. I will get sick. I cannot survive in a place like that. I am not like you. You will have to learn, I whispered, my tone devoid of any sympathy. Because you do not have any other options left. The trailer is legally in your name now, but do not think this is a free ride. I stood back up, adjusting my cuffs and looking down at the ruined golden child of the Washington family. The rent is exactly $900, I announced, clearly ensuring the remaining security guards and hotel staff heard the final verdict. And it is due on the 1st of every single month. I suggest you start filling out fast food applications immediately, Jasmine, because if you miss a single payment, Obsidian Vanguard will evict you from that swamp trailer just as quickly as we evicted your father from his mansion. I turned my back on her, completely refusing to offer another ounce of pity. Jasmine let out a final devastating scream of pure, absolute agony, realizing her permanent nightmare was just officially beginning right now. The once flawless socialite pounded her bleeding fists against the cold marble floor, completely shattered. The once flawless socialite pounded her bleeding fists against the cold marble floor, completely shattered. I did not waste another second looking at her. Jasmine had made her bed, and now she would have to sleep in it, surrounded by the swamp dampness and the rotting floorboards she thought I deserved. I slowly turned my back on her hysterical sobbing, shutting out the pathetic noise of her absolute ruin. The grand ballroom, which just an hour ago had been packed with 500 of Atlanta's most elite image-obsessed social climbers, was now practically empty. The massive crystal chandeliers cast a harsh, unforgiving light over the overturned chairs, the abandoned designer jackets, and the crushed floral centerpieces. The illusion of the Washington family dynasty lay in absolute ruins, scattered across the floor like broken glass. My private security detail formed a tight perimeter around the center of the room, keeping the remaining hotel staff at a safe distance. Reginald was still slumped against a structural pillar, staring blankly into space, completely paralyzed by the realization of his federal crimes and massive financial debts. I ignored him entirely. My gaze swept past the weeping bride, past the defeated politician, and settled on the only corner of the room that remained perfectly calm. Table 89. The wobbly, rusted table shoved near the swinging kitchen doors. The table they had assigned to me as a public insult. Sitting there sipping a glass of water with quiet, unwavering dignity was the only person in my entire bloodline who actually possessed a soul. My estranged Aunt Patrice. Unlike her sister Vivian, Patrice had never cared about designer labels, country club memberships, or securing a wealthy husband. She wore a simple, tailored gray pantsuit, her natural hair styled in neat, elegant locks. Decades ago, the Washington family had officially labeled Patrice the Black Sheep because she adamantly refused to join the corporate law firm my grandfather had built. Instead, she chose to become a social worker, dedicating her entire life to helping foster children in the most underserved neighborhoods of Atlanta. Vivian and Reginald had mercilessly mocked her for it, banning her from their lavish holiday parties because her modest salary embarrassed them in front of their wealthy political donors. Tonight they had seated her at table 89, right next to me, attempting to humiliate her in the exact same way. I walked slowly across the ruined ballroom, the sharp click of my heels cutting through the lingering sounds of Jasmine's weeping. When I reached the small, cramped table, Aunt Patrice looked up at me. She did not look afraid, and she certainly did not look shocked by the utter destruction I had just rained down upon her sister's family. She simply offered me a warm, genuine smile that reached all the way to her eyes. "You always did have a flair for the dramatic, Chiara Patrice," said her voice rich and steady. Though I have to admit, watching Reginald finally face the consequences of his own overwhelming greed was highly satisfying. I pulled out a rickety metal chair and sat down directly across from her. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cheap tablecloth. "I could not have built Obsidian Vanguard without you, Aunt Patrice," I stated, my tone softening for the first time all evening. "When Vivian and Reginald threw me out of the house with nothing but the clothes on my back, you were the only one who did not turn away. When I was starving, living in that freezing, mold-infested trailer, trying to code my first investment algorithm on a broken laptop, you showed up." Patrice waved a hand dismissively, though her eyes shone with unshed tears. "You were my niece. I was not going to let you starve while they threw lavish galas. You did more than just keep me from starving," I insisted, making sure she understood the absolute magnitude of my gratitude. "You worked double shifts at the youth center, just so you could secretly bring me bags of groceries every Sunday. When my electricity was about to be shut off, you paid the bill. When I could not afford the high-speed internet I desperately needed to launch my startup, you covered the cost out of your own modest paycheck. You sacrificed your own comfort to keep my dream alive when my own parents wanted me to fail." "I never told anyone," Patrice whispered, glancing toward where Vivian lay groaning on the floor. "Vivian would have made my life a living hell if she knew I was helping you. She wanted you to come crawling back begging for forgiveness. She wanted to break your spirit so you would conform to her perfect image. But I knew you had a fire in you, Chiara. I knew you were going to build an empire. I just wanted to make sure you survived long enough to light the match." "You did more than that," I replied softly. "You gave me the foundation to burn their fraudulent empire to the ground." I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket one final time. I bypassed my phone and the titanium credit card, pulling out a thick, heavy, cream-colored envelope. The flap was sealed with thick, dark red wax stamped with the official crest of Obsidian Vanguard. I slid the heavy envelope across the wobbly table until it rested directly in front of her folded hands. "Open it," I instructed. Patrice looked down at the envelope, her brow furrowing in confusion. She slowly broke the wax seal and pulled out a stack of crisp, legally binding documents. Her eyes scanned the first page and she let out a sharp, sudden gasp. Her hands began to tremble as she read the bold, capitalized print at the top of the deed. "Grandpa's Farm." Patrice breathed, looking up at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. "The old farm down in Savannah. Reginald sold it to commercial developers 10 years ago to pay off his gambling debts." It broke my heart. It was the only piece of our family history that actually meant something pure. "I bought it back from the commercial developers last month," I explained, watching the profound shock wash over her face. "They were planning to bulldoze the old farmhouse and pave over the peach orchards to build a generic strip mall. I outbid them by $3 million to stop the demolition. The land is completely secure. But that is not all. Keep reading." Patrice flipped to the next page. Tears began to spill over her eyelashes, tracing tracks down her cheeks. "I had a team of historical restoration architects spend the last 6 weeks completely renovating the main farmhouse." I continued, my voice steady and firm. "The foundation has been reinforced, the plumbing is brand new, and the wraparound porch has been fully restored to exactly how it looked when you were a little girl. The property taxes are prepaid for the next 50 years. The mortgage is non-existent. The deed you are holding is fully executed, legally binding, and registered exclusively in your name." Patrice pressed a trembling hand over her mouth, a choked sob escaping her throat. "Chiara, I cannot accept this. This is a multi-million-dollar property. You already paid me back for the groceries years ago. You accepted me when I had nothing," I countered, refusing to take no for an answer. "You gave me your last $20 when I needed it. Now I am giving you the ancestral land our grandfather actually loved." But turn to the final page, Aunt Patrice. There is one more thing. She shakily turned to the heavy cardstock at the back of the packet. She let out a loud, raw cry of absolute joy. It is a certified trust document, I stated, raising my voice slightly, so the words would echo across the empty ballroom. A dedicated retirement trust fund, established through the private banking arm of Obsidian Vanguard. It contains exactly $2 million in liquid tax-free assets. You have spent your entire life fighting for forgotten children in the worst neighborhoods of this city. You lived paycheck to paycheck because you chose compassion over corporate greed. You are retiring tonight, Aunt Patrice. You are moving to Savannah, and you are going to spend the rest of your life sitting on your porch drinking sweet tea and never worrying about a single bill ever again. Patrice could not contain her emotions any longer. She stood up from the rickety chair, throwing her arms around my neck and pulling me into a fierce, desperate embrace. She wept openly, crying tears of pure, unadulterated joy against my shoulder. I hugged her back tightly, feeling a genuine sense of warmth slice through the icy, calculated detachment I had maintained all evening. This was the only true redemption this broken family would ever see. A sudden vicious screech shattered our quiet moment of victory. Vivian had slowly regained consciousness on the floor near the center of the ballroom. The cold marble had roused her from her fainting spell. She had pushed herself up onto her hands and knees just in time to witness me handing over the multi-million-dollar deed and the massive trust fund to the sister she despised. The absolute blinding jealousy acted like a shot of adrenaline straight into her veins. The idea that the black sheep of the family was being rewarded with millions while she was facing imminent homelessness completely fractured her fragile mind. "You miserable, stealing wretch!" Vivian shrieked, her voice tearing through the room like a banshee. She scrambled to her feet, her ruined emerald gown tangling around her legs. She ignored her destroyed husband and her sobbing dress-tearing daughter. Her eyes were locked entirely on the thick envelope in Patrice's trembling hands. "That money belongs to me," Vivian roared, sprinting across the marble floor with surprising speed. "I am your mother. I brought you into this world. You owe me that trust fund. Give me that deed right now, Patrice, or I swear I will kill you." Vivian lunged forward, her manicured claws outstretched, aiming directly for her sister's throat. She fully intended to physically tear the documents from Patrice's grasp, but she severely underestimated the perimeter. She never even made it within 10 feet of Table 89. My lead security director, a towering man with zero tolerance for threats against his principals, stepped smoothly into her path. He did not draw a weapon. He did not shout a warning. He simply planted his feet, raised his massive forearm, and intercepted her frantic, aggressive charge. He caught Vivian square in the chest with the unyielding force of a brick wall. The impact stopped her momentum instantly. With a swift, practiced motion, the guard redirected her energy, easily tossing the shrieking matriarch backward. Vivian flew through the air, her expensive heels slipping out from under her. She hit the polished, pristine marble floor hard, violently sliding several feet before crashing into the base of a massive decorative pillar, like a completely discarded broken rag doll. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom swung open with a violent crash. Two federal agents marched back into the main hall, firmly gripping DeAndre by the shoulders of his tailored tuxedo jacket. He was no longer the slick, arrogant groom who had stood on the stage and bragged about his massive wealth. He was a blubbering, sobbing mess. Thick tears and sweat streamed down his face, completely soaking his expensive silk collar. He thrashed wildly against the agents, kicking his Italian leather shoes across the polished marble floor in a futile, pathetic attempt to break free. The crowd of remaining elite guests who had previously applauded his every word now pressed themselves tightly against the walls to avoid touching him. DeAndre screamed incoherently, begging for someone to call a lawyer, begging for a second chance. His desperate struggles only made the agents tighten their iron grip on his arms. As they dragged him down the center aisle, DeAndre desperately tried to grab onto a nearby table for leverage. His hand caught the edge of a pristine white tablecloth. He pulled hard, bringing the entire table crashing down. A massive, towering floral arrangement of imported white roses and orchids toppled over, shattering the heavy crystal vase into hundreds of jagged pieces. Gallons of water and crushed petals spilled across the dance floor, completely ruining the lavish, meticulously designed aesthetic of the $2 million wedding. DeAndre slipped in the water, falling to his knees, forcing the agents to physically drag his dead weight across the soaked marble. He wailed for his mother, but Beatrice had already vanished into the night, abandoning her son to save her own skin. The spectacular, messy destruction of his exit perfectly mirrored the absolute ruin of his fraudulent corporate empire. As the federal agents finally hauled DeAndre out through the front lobby, the heavy doors swung shut behind them, sealing his fate. The ballroom was left in a state of absolute devastation. Broken glass, crushed flowers, and spilled champagne covered the floor. Vivian remained crumpled against the decorative pillar, while Jasmine continued to weep silently near table 89. I stood in the center of the wreckage, my posture straight and my expression completely unreadable. I watched the dust settle over the ruined dynasty. Suddenly, a shadow fell across my path. Reginald stepped out from behind a toppled table and walked slowly toward me. The arrogant, booming politician who had threatened to throw me in a federal penitentiary was completely gone. In his place stood a desperate man grasping at his very last straw. He had tried intimidation. He had tried throwing his wealth in my face. Both tactics had failed spectacularly. Now he was preparing to play his final, most manipulative card. He straightened his ruined tuxedo jacket, cleared his throat, and attempted to summon a tone of deep paternal wisdom. He looked around at the few straggling guests who were lingering near the exits, making sure he had an audience for his next performance. Kiara, my daughter, Reginald began lowering his voice to a smooth, conciliatory baritone. We have had our differences tonight. Tempers have flared, and harsh words have been spoken. But you must look at the bigger picture here. You are letting your personal anger blind you to the catastrophic damage you are causing to our people. He took a step closer, holding his hands open in a gesture of fake surrender. We are a prominent Black family in Atlanta. We represent success, power, and excellence in our community. When you tear us down so publicly, you do not just hurt me and your mother. You hurt the entire community. You give the media exactly what they want. They love to see successful Black families tear each other apart. They love to see our dynasties fall. You are handing them the weapons to destroy our collective legacy. He paused, letting his manipulative words hang in the air. You have built an incredible company, Kiara. You have immense power. But you must use that power to protect our community, to uplift your family, not to hand us over to the federal authorities and the banking cartels. We must stand together in Black family unity. If you forgive this debt and let us keep the estate, we can unite our empires. We can show the world a united front. Do not destroy the very community you come from just to settle a petty childhood grudge. We can actually rebuild this family tonight. I stared at the man who had sired me, feeling a profound, sickening wave of absolute disgust. His ability to weaponize the concept of community solidarity to cover up his own selfish criminal greed was truly masterful. He had spent his entire political career using those exact same buzzwords to manipulate voters, and now he was trying to use them to escape the consequences of his massive financial fraud. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I spoke with a quiet, lethal authority that cut straight through his pathetic performance. You do not care about the community, Reginald. I stated my words, slicing through the heavy silence of the ballroom. Do not stand there and preach to me about Black family unity when you threw your own daughter out into the street because she refused to join a superficial legacy sorority. You do not care about uplifting our people. You only care about uplifting your own bank account. I took a deliberate step toward him, forcing him to look me dead in the eye. You spent the last decade using your seat on the city council to rezone historic low-income Black neighborhoods. You systematically pushed out families who had lived there for generations. You raised their property taxes, forced them into foreclosure, and then sold their ancestral homes to commercial developers for massive personal profit. You gentrified the very community you claimed to protect, and you had the absolute audacity to stand at press conferences and call it urban renewal. You purposefully destroyed hundreds of working families just to fund your elite, glamorous lifestyle. Reginald opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. His face drained of color as I exposed the dark, corrupt reality of his political career. I watched your voting record, Reginald. I continued my voice unwavering. I tracked the shell companies you used to accept kickbacks from those commercial developers. You stole wealth from vulnerable families to fund your elite country club memberships and your luxury cars. You sacrificed your own community so your golden daughter could wear a Vera Wang dress and sip imported champagne with corrupt judges. You are the exact predator you claim to protect people from. I am not destroying the community tonight. I am cleansing it. By liquidating your fraudulent assets, by taking back the historic family estate you mortgaged for a fake wedding, I am returning the wealth to the people you stole it from. Obsidian Vanguard will be transforming your foreclosed properties into affordable housing units and community centers. Your legacy is officially over. You are nothing but a cautionary tale now. Your name will be an absolute disgrace. Reginald stared at me, his eyes wide with absolute suffocating terror. The realization that I knew every single detail of his political corruption completely paralyzed him. He had absolutely nothing left to say. His final manipulation had failed. I turned away from him, dismissing his existence entirely. I adjusted the cuffs of my bespoke suit, ensuring the fabric sat perfectly flat against my wrists. I slowly surveyed the grand ballroom one last time. The space looked like a luxurious war zone. Overturned chairs, shattered crystal, and ruined floral centerpieces painted a vivid picture of the Washington family's spectacular downfall. My gaze drifted toward the far end of the room and settled on the massive six-tier wedding cake. It stood perfectly intact on a raised platform, completely untouched. The pristine white fondant and delicate sugar flowers looked ridiculous amidst the surrounding carnage. It was a flawless hollow monument to a marriage built entirely on lies, greed, and superficial optics. It was the perfect symbol for Jasmine and DeAndre's fake empire. Beautiful on the outside, completely empty on the inside. I gave the cake one final dismissive look and turned my back on the wreckage. I walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, my head held high. The remaining elite guests and hotel staff parted immediately, clearing a wide path for me to exit. No one spoke. No one moved to stop me. They simply watched in quiet awe as the true master of the room made her departure. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the grand lobby. The cool, crisp night air rushed in as the automatic glass doors slid open, welcoming me outside. The chaos and suffocating tension of the ruined wedding instantly faded away. I stood under the brightly lit portico of the luxury hotel, taking a deep, cleansing breath. The city of Atlanta sparkled in the distance, a sprawling metropolis where I had quietly built a massive financial empire entirely in the dark. A uniformed valet rushed forward, holding open the rear door of my custom midnight black Rolls-Royce. The powerful engine purred softly, waiting to carry me back to the life I had earned. I nodded my thanks to the valet and slid into the plush, pristine leather interior. The heavy door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing me inside a quiet, impenetrable fortress of absolute luxury and security. I settled into the seat, feeling the immense, crushing weight of the past decade finally lift off my shoulders. The war was officially over. I had won entirely. I instructed my driver to take me home. As the massive Rolls-Royce glided smoothly away from the curb, I leaned back and glanced into the rearview mirror. The brightly lit hotel lobby was clearly visible through the large glass doors. I watched as Reginald, Vivian, and Jasmine were physically herded toward the exit. The hotel management had clearly received my orders. The exact same private security guards that Reginald had aggressively tried to use to arrest me earlier in the evening were now forcefully escorting my family out of the building. Reginald tried to resist, puffing out his chest and arguing with the lead guard, but he was swiftly shoved forward into the street. Vivian stumbled alongside him, clutching her ruined green dress, weeping openly as a guard physically blocked her from re-entering the lobby. Jasmine trailed behind them barefoot and sobbing, dragging the tattered remains of her wedding gown across the dirty pavement. The elite family that had spent their entire lives treating others like garbage was being physically ejected into the cold street, completely banished from the high society world they had worshipped. I watched their pathetic, humiliating act shrink into the distance as my heavy armored car slowly turned the dark corner, finally leaving them entirely in the past, where they truly undeniably belonged, completely and forever alone. 6 months had passed since the catastrophic collapse of the Washington family dynasty inside that grand Atlanta hotel ballroom. The brutal, inescapable wheel of justice had finally ground down every single antagonist to the bare, unvarnished truth of their existence. Outside the glass walls of the sprawling corporate skyscraper, the brilliant Georgia sun beat down on the bustling downtown streets. But inside, the atmosphere was as cold and calculating as a winter storm. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive suite, holding a warm cup of black coffee, looking out over the sprawling skyline of a city I had helped reshape. The journey from the back of the room to the head of the table had been paved with calculated risks and unyielding resolve, but the view from the summit was entirely worth every single tear and sacrifice. Down on the gritty sidewalks of a working-class neighborhood across town, far away from the gated communities and country club gates, the reality of life was playing out for the former golden child. Jasmine stood in a greasy, faded polyester uniform behind the drive-through window of a 24-hour fast food chain. Her once pristine blonde hair extensions were gone, replaced by a tight utilitarian hairnet that pressed flat against her scalp. The custom Vera Wang wedding dress had long since been sold off to a second-hand consignment shop for pennies on the dollar. Now she wore a plastic name tag pinned crookedly to her chest reading management trainee, though everyone in the neighborhood knew she was nothing more than an entry-level cashier. The ultimate poetic justice had been swiftly delivered. She was spending her days taking orders from teenagers who gleefully posted photos of her downfall on TikTok, forcing her to hand out greasy burgers and cheap sodas to the exact type of working-class people she had spent her entire life mocking from her high horses. As she pushed open the sliding window to hand a bag of food to a customer, a gleaming midnight black Maybach slowed down near the drive-through lane. Inside the luxury vehicle sat two of her former sorority sisters' women who had once fawned over her wedding registry and begged for invitations to her bridal shower. They rolled down the tinted window, pointing directly at Jasmine with open, vicious amusement. One of them held up her phone, snapping a clear photograph of Jasmine's miserable, tear-streaked face, illuminated by the harsh neon menu board. They did not wave. They did not offer a polite greeting. Instead, they burst into loud, cruel laughter, revved the expensive engine of their sports utility vehicle, and sped off into the afternoon traffic, leaving Jasmine choking on exhaust fumes, completely broken and utterly alone. Farther out, near the swampy, mosquito-ridden outskirts of the city, the former pillars of Atlanta high society were enduring their own private circle of hell. Reginald and Vivian occupied the rusted, mold-infested trailer that had once served as my childhood prison. The roof still leaked gallons of dirty water every time it rained heavily, pooling on the rotting wooden floorboards and turning the interior into a humid swamp. Reginald, the once proud, commanding city councilman who had bullied voters and accepted massive kickbacks, now sat on a broken lawn chair outside on the narrow metal porch. He was unshaven, wearing a stained flannel shirt that hung loosely over his shrunken frame, chain-smoking cheap cigarettes while waiting for his public defender to call. Multiple federal indictments for campaign finance fraud, bribery, and embezzlement hung over his head like a guillotine. His political career was permanently erased, his pension seized by the federal government, and his name dragged through the mud in every major newspaper across the country. Inside the cramped, foul-smelling kitchen, Vivian shuffled around in a pair of torn slippers. The woman who had once demanded custom emerald gowns and hosted elite charity galas was now desperately trying to scrub black mold off the bathroom tiles with a cheap sponge and a bottle of bleach. She had completely lost her social standing. The bridge club members had blocked her number. The country club had revoked her membership. The upscale boutiques where she used to shop had blacklisted her credit cards. Every single person in Atlanta high society had actively shunned them, pretending they did not exist whenever their names came up in conversation. They were complete outcasts, trapped in a rotting metal box of their own making, forced to face the horrifying reality that their obsession with superficial optics had destroyed their entire bloodline. Meanwhile, Inside a maximum security federal penitentiary, several hundred miles away, the golden boy husband was learning a very different kind of lesson. DeAndre sat on the edge of a bolted metal cot inside a sterile 8 by 10 concrete cell. The designer suits, the imported Italian leather shoes, and the expensive diamond-encrusted watches were entirely gone. In their place, he wore a coarse, bright orange jumpsuit stamped with the bold black letters of the Department of Corrections. He was serving a mandatory 15-year sentence for federal wire fraud, money laundering, and pension fund embezzlement. The federal judge had made an explicit example of him, ensuring there would be no early parole and no lenient plea deals. The arrogant, untouchable corporate executive was now forced to spend his days dodging violent gang politics and performing menial laundry duty in the prison basement for pennies an hour. His mother, Beatrice, had officially filed for divorce on his behalf, cutting off all financial and emotional ties to completely distance herself from his radioactive legacy. DeAndre spent his silent nights staring at the chipping gray paint of his cell ceiling, replaying the exact moment he had walked past table 89 and locked eyes with the woman he had so foolishly underestimated. The realization that he had brought down his own empire by trying to impress the wrong people was a torture far worse than any physical confinement. Back in downtown Atlanta, the scene transitioned smoothly into the sprawling, ultra-modern corporate boardroom of Obsidian Vanguard. The room featured panoramic floor-to-ceiling glass windows that offered an unobstructed, breathtaking view of the booming city skyline below. The afternoon sun cast a warm golden glow across the polished, massive mahogany table that dominated the center of the room. I sat calmly at the absolute head of the table, dressed in a sharp, impeccably tailored charcoal suit that commanded immediate, absolute respect. My personal executive assistant stood quietly near the smart screen, flipping through the quarterly financial reports and strategic urban development updates. Seated around the long mahogany table were the true architects of this new era. Aunt Patrice sat to my immediate right, wearing a gorgeous silk blouse, her face glowing with the quiet, profound peace of a woman who had finally found her true home on the restored family farm in Savannah. Though she still flew in twice a month to chair our philanthropic foundation board. Flanking her were brilliant young minority entrepreneurs, brilliant tech founders, and community leaders, whom I was actively mentoring, funding, and empowering through our newly established venture capital initiatives. They were not corporate frauds or image-obsessed social climbers. They were genuine, driven visionaries who understood the true value of hard work, integrity, and community uplift. My phone vibrated softly against the smooth mahogany wood. I glanced down at the screen. It was a brief notification from my private security team monitoring the old family estate. The moving crew had officially finished clearing out the last of Reginald and Vivian's belongings, tossing the remaining garbage bags onto the public curb just in time for the midnight deadline. The historic mansion was now completely empty, ready for the comprehensive multi-million-dollar renovation that would turn it into a tuition-free leadership academy for underprivileged children. I tapped the screen to dismiss the notification, feeling a profound, unshakable wave of complete internal peace wash over me. I had not sought out petty revenge simply to cause pain. I had systematically dismantled a corrupt, abusive system to restore balance, justice, and truth to the world. I slowly looked up from my phone, locking my eyes onto the reflection of the Atlanta skyline in the massive glass windows. The city stretched out infinitely before me, full of endless potential and new beginnings. I smiled softly, knowing that no matter where life's unpredictable plot twists might lead, I would never again let anyone assign me a seat at a table. I had the absolute power to buy. The heavy oak doors of the corporate boardroom swung open, pulling my attention away from the sprawling city skyline. The sharp click of heels and the warm hum of genuine laughter filled the previously quiet space. My chosen family was arriving for our weekly executive strategy meeting, bringing an energy that completely redefined the concept of legacy. I turned away from the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked at the people who truly mattered. Aunt Patrice walked in first, radiating a profound, unapologetic joy. The stress and exhaustion that had aged her during those years of fighting the foster care system had entirely vanished. She wore a beautifully tailored linen suit in a vibrant shade of sapphire, carrying a thick portfolio filled with blueprints for the new youth centers we were funding across the state. She took her seat to my immediate right, giving my hand a gentle, reassuring squeeze that spoke volumes of our shared history and mutual triumph. Behind her followed the brilliant, fiercely driven minds I had handpicked to lead the next generation of Obsidian Vanguard. These were not the legacy fraternity alumni or the entitled old money heirs who had spent their entire lives coasting on their parents' corrupt political connections. These were the hungry, brilliant, and systematically overlooked young entrepreneurs of color whom the Atlanta elite had actively tried to keep locked out of the room. There was Malik, a brilliant software engineer who had built a revolutionary financial literacy app for low-income communities. Reginald had once denied his zoning permits to build a community tech hub, dismissing him as insignificant. Today, Obsidian Vanguard was funding his global expansion with a $50 million seed round. Next to him sat Maya, a fierce architectural visionary, who was officially spearheading the massive renovation of my family's former historic estate, transforming the symbol of my parents' greed into a tuition-free leadership academy for marginalized girls. I watched them take their seats around the massive mahogany table, laying out their tablets and design mock-ups with an infectious, undeniable passion. They respected me not because I demanded blind obedience, but because I had actively empowered them to build their own empires. There were no fake smiles here. There was no desperate social climbing or toxic conditional affection. This table was built entirely on merit loyalty and a shared vision of lifting up our community rather than bleeding it dry for superficial optics. I took a deep breath, feeling the absolute undeniable contrast between the sterile, hostile environment of my biological family's dinners and the vibrant, collaborative powerhouse I had meticulously built from the ground up. I walked slowly from the window and took my place at the absolute head of the table. The lively chatter seamlessly faded into a respectful, attentive silence as my team looked toward me, ready to execute our vision for the future. I rested my hands flat on the polished mahogany surface, grounding myself in the undeniable reality of my success. I looked at each of their faces, seeing the exact same fire and determination that had kept me alive during my darkest, most desperate days in that mold-infested trailer. I thought about the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of my mother throwing that dirty waiter's apron onto table 89. I thought about Jasmine's smug, heavily contoured face as she tried to banish me to the kitchen. I thought about Reginald's booming, authoritative voice, attempting to crush my spirit with his fake political power. They had spent my entire life desperately trying to convince me that I was inherently worthless, simply because I refused to play their shallow, materialistic games. They genuinely believed that by withholding their conditional love and cutting off my financial resources, they could force me into a permanent state of pathetic submission. They thought they could define my worth by placing me at the back of the room. I stated my voice steady, resonant, and carrying the absolute weight of irrefutable victory. They believed that by handing me a rusty key to a rotting trailer, they were sealing my fate as a permanent failure. But what they did not know is that when you build an empire in the dark, the light shines exactly where you command it to. I paused, letting the profound truth of those words settle over the brilliant minds gathered around me. Aunt Patrice smiled, a knowing, triumphant spark dancing in her eyes. Never let anyone assign you a seat at a table you have the power to buy. I continued, my gaze sweeping across the boardroom. Never shrink yourself to fit into a box that was explicitly designed to suffocate your potential. We do not beg for invitations to exclusive, corrupt spaces. We buy the entire building, we change the locks, and we build our own tables, where excellence, integrity, and true community uplift are the only currencies that actually matter. Now let us get to work on expanding our reach to ensure no one else is ever left behind in the dark again. Our legacy will easily outlive their greed. As the boardroom erupted into productive, passionate discussion, the scene slowly begins to transition. The corporate skyline fades, bringing my voice directly to you, the audience watching this journey unfold. Has your family ever tried to put you in a box you clearly outgrew? Did they mistake your quiet, calculated perseverance for weakness? Did you have to build your entire success in total silence while they actively tried to tear you down and humiliate you? You are not alone in that struggle. The deepest betrayals often serve as the exact fuel we need to ignite our greatest triumphs. Tell us your story in the comments below. Share how you broke free from toxic family expectations and built your own independent reality. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and share this video to remind everyone that the best revenge is unbothered, massive success. Keep building your empire in the dark, and when the time is right, buy the table.